Hey folks, so we're going to continue working on improving writing style and creating well-balanced sentences using stylistic effects in coordinated series. So what we're looking at today is using repetition effectively. So we'll take a look at why repetition is useful in writing and then how to use repetition in sentences and in paragraphs. So if you look at these two sentences, I've got the same sentence written two different ways. I've got one I wrote to Harvard, Yale, and Princeton, and then two I wrote to Harvard, to Yale, and to Princeton. Now, both of these sentences, they say the same thing. They essentially do it in the same way, but stylistically, they are a little bit different. So one of the ways that we can kind of look at this is figuring out how we're defining those different slots. If you remember back to parallel structure, items in a series fit into the same slot of a sentence. So doing both of these in two different ways is going to set up essentially kind of like two different slots. In the first one, I wrote to is the stem, and then Harvard, Yale, Princeton fit into those slots. If we divided it out into separate sentences, it would say the same thing. In the second sentence, though, the stem is simply I wrote. So to Harvard, to Yale, and to Princeton are the three phrases that go into that slot. So two different ways to write that same sentence. Both of them are completely correct, grammatically, stylistically, all that. They're concise, they're easy to read. So neither one of these is wrong. It's just more about the writer's choice and what the writer is trying to do with that. So to look at how this might be used effectively with repetition, we're going to look at a different example of a sentence. So if we look at this sentence you'll notice is a lot longer, it's a lot more complex. But if you look at, I've underlined each section of the series. If you notice when we are looking at the different parts of the series, I've got the same word about here, is the same word is repeated at the beginning of each phrase. Oh, there's another one right here. So I've got about. So if we broke it down into separate sentences, my speech was about Vietnam, abortion, and civil rights. My speech was about the sense of community or class shared. My speech was about the individual's rights and responsibilities. My speech was about the necessity to defy norms, blah, blah. So one of the things that repetition can be used for is in these longer, more complex sentences, you can repeat a word or two at the beginning of each item in a list to make it a little bit easier to understand. If we just said my speech was about as the stem and then we had all of the different items in it, it might be a little bit confusing to understand what the separate items in the series are. So think of the word about almost as maybe like a bullet point kind of thing. So here's bullet point number 1, here's bullet point number 2, bullet point number 3, and then bullet point number 4. And so each time as a reader you hear the word about, it kind of resets to like the next item of that list. Now in these examples, again, I got the same sentence but written two different ways. In the first one, again, if we look at kind of the stem of it, each one washed in from somewhere unseen and out again somewhere unknown. So each wave washed is going to be the stem. And then as far as the beginnings of each phrase, I've got in and then I've got out. So again, grammatically, there's nothing wrong with that. But if we look at the second sentence here, I've got washed, which is repeated. So washed here is repeated, again, to add a sense of clarity, to emphasize what's being said there. So each wave washed. And again, anytime you see repetition, you should think what's being emphasized. So each wave washed in from somewhere unseen and washed out again somewhere. By repeating that phrase or that word washed, we're really emphasizing the fact that the action is happening. So repetition also, not just for clarity's sake to make like a type of bullet list, it can also be used to really emphasize one aspect of a sentence. Now, one thing to keep in mind while you're writing is that repetition does not have to just be in a single sentence. We can use repetition in paragraphs to create a sense of cohesion. So if we look at this example here, this is a paragraph from a story called Shamengwa. You'll notice that I've got the first and last sentence is underlined. The first sentence, that is how my fiddle came to be. The last sentence, that is why no other fiddle I will play. So this repetition of that is and the idea of the fiddle, it kind of bookends the beginning and end of the paragraph, again, to add some clarity and to emphasize the point of the fiddle in this particular sense. Now, in this paragraph, we've got repetition again. It's in the middle of the paragraph, but this one's a little bit different. So the three sentences here that are using repetition: as the night goes black, I sing for you. As the sun comes up, I call across the water. As the time goes on, I begin to accept what I have done. And you might notice it's not exactly word for word the same, but we do have some similar things. We've got as the at the beginning of each sentence, and then we also have I followed by an action in the second half of the sentence. So there's a pattern of repetition that's set up as the something happens, comma, I do something in response. So when you read it out, there's a rhythm to it. As the night goes black, I sing for you. As the sun comes up, I call across the water. As the time goes on, I begin to accept what I have done. And then that repetition all kind of works together to emphasize this point as time continues on, as days continue going, I am performing this action. So again, when you're writing paragraphs, you can use repetition with this type of stuff to help emphasize a point. So you can take maybe a key point that you're writing about and extend it into a couple of sentences using some like repetition patterns and changing up some of the different ideas in there. One last paragraph we've got here, and again, these sentences at the end, they use that same basic pattern of repetition, which is the beginning of the sentence. Let us, and then let us here, and let our here at the end. So the break in that repetition is going to emphasize that final point. So just to recap some of the key ideas about using repetition when you're writing. One, use repetition for emphasis. Repetition always means emphasis. Two, use it in longer, complex series to make things more clear. Think about using it as almost like a bullet point thing. Three, it's very useful for memory. So when you repeat stuff, when you repeat words and phrases, that gets stuck in your reader's memory. So the ideas that you want readers to remember, use repetition there. And then four, that last point, extend it beyond just the sentence. Use it throughout paragraphs, not just sentences. Doing that, it's going to help you make your points, make it a lot more clear when you're writing, and hopefully make your writing a lot more memorable.